I remember the exact moment I knew. It wasn't lipstick on a collar or a strange perfume or a mysterious text message left carelessly on the kitchen counter. That's the stuff of bad television. It was something far more devastating. A laugh. I was standing at the stove on a Tuesday evening in late October, stirring a pot of the butternut soup that Blair had always said was his favorite. He was in the living room, and his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and laughed. This soft, private, delighted little laugh that I hadn't heard from him in almost 2 years. A laugh that used to be mine. He tucked the phone into his pocket without a word and walked into the kitchen, kissed me on the cheek, and said something unremarkable about being hungry. But I stood there with the wooden spoon in my hand and felt the floor move beneath my feet. That was the night everything changed, but I didn't say anything yet. My name is Alison Collins. I am 41 years old. I am a landscape architect, a decent cook, a loyal friend, and for 14 years I was the wife of Blair Collins, a software company director, weekend golfer, and, as I would soon confirm, a liar of extraordinary patience and dedication. We had built what looked from the outside like a genuinely good life. A 4-bedroom home in a quiet suburb with a garden I had designed myself. A joint investment portfolio. 2 cats, Biscuit and Fig, who slept at the foot of our bed. Date nights when they happened. Holidays when we could coordinate our schedules. What we didn't have anymore and hadn't for some time was the thing underneath all of it. The warmth, the reaching for each other. I had told myself it was just the natural cooling that happens in long marriages. I had told myself we were fine. I was still telling myself that when he laughed at that text message. It's important to remember that I didn't act immediately. One of the things I know about myself, and 14 years of marriage to a man who underestimated me had only sharpened this knowledge, is that I don't make moves when I'm emotional. I make moves when I'm ready. So I watched, I paid attention, and I kept notes. He started working late on Tuesdays and Thursdays specifically. His gym bag came home smelling of shower gel that wasn't the brand we kept in our bathroom. He began sleeping with his phone face down on the nightstand, which he had never done in 14 years. He became strangely more affectionate toward me. Little gifts, compliments offered too brightly, an enthusiasm that felt like guilt, which it most probably was. 3 weeks after the laugh at the stove, I picked up the phone of my friend Ren Castellano over a bottle of wine and searched for private investigators in our city. I found Damon Quirk. Damon Quirk ran a small operation out of a nondescript office above a dry cleaner on Fairfield Street. He was in his late 50s, a quiet guy with the kind of steady eyes that told you he had seen most things and had been shocked by very few of them. He didn't make me feel embarrassed for being there, which I appreciated enormously. I sat across from his desk and laid out what I had noticed. He listened without interrupting, took notes in a small spiral notebook, and when I finished, he simply said, "Give me 2 weeks." What Damon found in those 2 weeks was thorough enough to make a prosecutor weep with gratitude. He followed Blair on a Thursday evening to a wine bar in the city centre, where Blair met a woman named Marlene Orano. She was 34 and worked in his company's marketing division, which explained why her name had appeared in his emails without ever raising a flag and had, according to Damon's timeline, been involved with my husband for approximately 11 months. 11 months! I sat in Damon's office when he showed me the photographs, breathed very carefully and said, "What else can we get?" He looked at me steadily. "How far do you want to go?" "As far as the law allows," I said. What Damon did next was, in hindsight, the foundation of everything. With my full authorization and following careful consultation to ensure every step was legal, he installed a series of small cameras and audio devices throughout our home. He positioned them in common areas, never in bathrooms or bedrooms. The living room, the kitchen, the home office where Blair sometimes worked from home. The cloud storage he set up was encrypted, continuous, and completely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Then we waited. I went home to my husband. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I watched him lie to my face, the same way he had been doing for nearly a year, and I smiled, nodded, and passed him the salt. It's a strange thing performing your own marriage. There were moments, quiet Sunday mornings or evenings when he fell asleep on the sofa, with Fig curled on his chest, when the grief of it nearly cracked me open. 14 years I had loved this man. Part of me still did, which made the betrayal feel like a wound that kept reopening every time he looked at me like everything was fine. But I held it. I held all of it, and I smiled, and I waited. The recordings were more than enough. On a Wednesday afternoon, when I had told Blair I had a client consultation across the city, he brought Marlene Orano into our home, into our kitchen, where he had eaten the food I cooked, into our living room, where they sat on the sofa I had chosen and talked. And this is the part that cut deepest, deeper even, than the intimacy. They talked about me, about how I was oblivious, about how Blair was planning to ask for a divorce. Eventually, but needed to wait until a particular portion of shared investments matured, so the split would be cleaner, about how Marlene should be patient because it would be worth it, and how he would make sure I didn't walk away with everything. I parked 3 streets from our house, watched the footage on my laptop in my car. A strange sound escaped my throat, and my eyes stung with tears, but I sat with it for a while, and then I called my attorney. Nola Ferridge had been recommended to me by Ren, who described her as the kind of woman who irons her court documents and then uses them to paper-cut her opponents. Nola was 53, wore sharp blazers, spoke in precise and devastating sentences, and within 40 minutes of me sitting in her office, she had reviewed Damon's preliminary findings and said, "Alison, we are going to be very thorough." We met 4 times before I made my next move. Each meeting was scheduled around Blair's routines, so there was no risk of overlap, no suspicious gaps in my calendar. I was meticulous. Nola was methodical. Together we built a case that was quiet, airtight, and absolute. There was the matter of the shared investments, which I now understood Blair was monitoring carefully for his own exit strategy. There was our home, which I had contributed to significantly, not just financially, but through years of renovation planning, the garden redesign, the structural improvements that had nearly doubled its value. Then there were certain financial decisions Blair had made in the past 18 months that, under examination, revealed a pattern of quietly positioning assets in ways that would have been very inconvenient for me in a divorce I hadn't known was coming. Nola found all of it. "He was preparing to leave you on his timeline," she said at our 3rd meeting, "with you at maximum disadvantage. Now we're going to introduce him to yours." The fake business trip was Ren's idea, actually. I had simply planned to stay at a hotel, but Ren correctly pointed out that I would be miserable alone in a hotel room, overthinking everything, when what I needed was to be somewhere comfortable and close. Her neighbor, Iris Tamblyn, rented out a spare room through a local arrangement, and within a day I had quietly moved a bag of essentials there. Blair dropped me at the train station with a kiss on the cheek and told me to have a safe trip. I walked into the station, then exited through a side entrance and took a cab to Iris Tamblyn's guest room, which had a small desk where I spent 3 days working with Nola, reviewing documents and watching the remaining cloud footage that Damon forwarded to me in the evenings. What I discovered in those 3 days nearly broke me twice over. The first break was emotional, watching my husband be tender with another woman in the spaces of our shared life, using words and gestures I recognized because he had once given them to me. There is a particular grief in watching someone love someone else with the same tools they used to love you. It makes you question the original, makes you wonder if it was ever real or just rehearsal. The second break was practical. Among the conversations recorded in our home office was a phone call in which Blair spoke with his brother, Fergus, about transferring a portion of his private savings into Fergus's name temporarily, an arrangement clearly designed to reduce the assets visible in a divorce settlement. I forwarded that recording to Nola at 11:30 at night. Her reply came at 11:32. Beautiful. Sleep well. I returned home on the fourth day as if I'd stepped off a train. Blair hugged me in the hallway and said he'd missed me. I said I'd missed him too, and strangely, I meant it. I missed the version of him I had believed in, the one who had maybe existed before this, or maybe never had at all. 2 weeks later, I served him with divorce papers. The look on his face, the way it moved through confusion into alarm, into a rapidly recalculating kind of fear, was something I had not anticipated, feeling so little satisfaction about. I had imagined this moment with something like triumph. Instead, I felt very tired, very clear, and completely certain. He called Nola aggressive and hired his own attorney. Garrison would not have a good few months. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in February. Blair arrived with his attorney, a man named Garrison Manuel, who wore expensive suits and spoke to female attorneys with the barely concealed condescension of someone who had never once been properly opposed. From the way Blair sat, loose, almost casual, his hands folded on the table with the confidence of a man who believed he had managed his exposure, I could tell he thought he knew what was coming. He didn't know about Damon. He didn't know about the cameras, and he didn't know what Nola Ferridge had been quietly assembling for 3 months. I sat beside Nola at the plaintiff's table, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. The Honorable Judge Petra Solvay presided, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses. She wore low on her nose, which gave her the permanent air of someone who had heard every possible excuse and was braced for another. Garrison Manuel opened first, as expected. He rose from his chair with the unhurried ease of a man performing confidence. Your Honor, the respondent, Mr. Blair Collins, comes before this court as a man of considerable professional achievement and impeccable character. The petitioner's claims in this matter are, at their core, the product of a marriage that had regrettably, and through no singular fault, simply run its course. What we will demonstrate today is that the asset distribution being sought by the petitioner is grossly disproportionate, that the claims of financial misconduct are entirely without foundation, and that Mr. Collins has at all times acted in good faith toward the dissolution of this marriage. He sat down with a small, satisfied adjustment of his jacket. Nola didn't rise immediately. She made a small note on her legal pad. Then she stood. Your Honor, the petitioner, Mrs. Allison Collins, comes before this court with 14 years of documented contribution, financial, professional, and personal, to a marital estate that the respondent has spent the better part of the last 12 months attempting to quietly dismantle in his own favor. What we will demonstrate today is not merely the breakdown of a marriage, but the deliberate and calculated effort by the respondent to ensure that breakdown would leave his wife with as little as possible. We have evidence, Your Honor, quite a lot of it. She sat down. Judge Solvay's eyes moved between the two tables with the measured neutrality of someone entirely unbothered by drama. Garrison called Blair to the stand first. Blair straightened his tie, walked to the witness stand with his shoulders back, and answered Garrison's opening questions in the smooth, practiced tone of a man who had rehearsed. I'd like to take a moment and pause. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please show a kindness by clicking like and subscribe. It would help our channel so much. Let's continue our story. Mr. Collins, your wife's petition claims that you deliberately concealed marital assets ahead of these proceedings. Is that accurate? Absolutely not. Every asset I hold has been properly disclosed. My financial position has been completely transparent. And the claim that certain funds were transferred to your brother, Fergus Collins. Is there any truth to that? I made a personal loan to my brother. It was a family matter, entirely unrelated to these proceedings. Nothing improper about it whatsoever. Thank you, no further questions. Garrison sat down looking satisfied. Blair began to relax against the back of the witness chair. Then Nola stood up and she picked up a folder. Mr. Collins, you've just described a transfer of funds to your brother Fergus as a personal loan. Is that correct? That's correct. A loan implies an expectation of repayment. Can you produce any loan agreement written, signed, and dated that formalizes this arrangement? There was a brief pause. Then Blair said, "It was an informal arrangement between brothers." An informal arrangement, I see. Your Honour, I'd like to submit Exhibit A. Bank records showing a transfer of $68,000 from the respondent's private savings account to the account of Fergus Collins, made on the 14th of November, just 3 weeks after divorce proceedings were first discussed between the parties. She calmly placed the document on the clerk's desk. Garrison rose. Objection, Your Honour. The timing of a family financial arrangement is not evidence of misconduct. Your Honour, the timing is precisely the point. I would further submit that the characterization of this transfer as a loan isn't only undocumented, it's contradicted by the respondent's own words. Overruled. Continue, Miss Ferridge, Judge Solvay said. Thank you, Your Honour. Mr. Collins, I'd like to play a recording for the court. This audio was captured in the Home Office of the marital residence on the evening of November the 9th. Your Honour, this is Exhibit B. The room was quiet. Blair's jaw tightened. Just slightly. But I saw it. The recording played through the courtroom speakers. Blair's voice, clear and entirely comfortable, speaking to his brother. Just hold it in your account until everything's settled. Once the divorce goes through and the numbers are locked in, we'll move it back. She won't see it. Her attorney is decent, but she doesn't know what she doesn't know, does she? The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Garrison jumped to his feet. Your Honour, I must strenuously object to the admission of this recording. The manner in which this was obtained raises serious questions of privacy and legality. Your Honour, I anticipated this objection, and I'm fully prepared to address it. The recording devices were installed within the marital home by a licensed private investigator operating under the express authorization of the legal homeowner and co-title holder, Mrs. Alison Collins. All recordings were made exclusively in common areas of the property, the living room, the kitchen, and the home office. No recordings were made in any private or restricted space. I have the documentation confirming the investigator's licensure and the full chain of custody for every piece of evidence submitted today. I'd like to submit those as Exhibit C. Garrison interrupted. Your Honour, this is a fishing expedition designed to... Judge Solvay removed her glasses and looked at Garrison with the expression of someone who had been interrupting her internally for some time. Mr. Manuel, I've reviewed the documentation. The recordings are admissible. Please sit down. Manuel sat down. His jacket seemed slightly less impressive than it had an hour ago. Nola let the silence settle before she continued. Mr. Collins, I'd like to turn now to the matter of the marital home. Your submission indicates that you consider the property to be primarily funded by your income. Is that your position? I was the primary earner, yes, Blair said. Your Honour, Exhibit D, a comprehensive record of improvements made to the marital property over the past 9 years, including full structural renovation of the east wing, complete garden redesign, and restoration of the original period features throughout the ground floor. These improvements were project managed entirely by Mrs. Collins, whose professional expertise as a landscape architect and renovation consultant contributed directly to what independent appraisal Exhibit E confirms is a 94% increase in the property's market value since purchase. Would you say, Mr. Collins, that that increase happened by itself? Blair opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he said, Alison managed some of the renovation work, yes. She managed all of it, without professional fee. Had she billed at her standard consultancy rate for the hours documented in Exhibit F, the marital estate would owe her in excess of $140,000 in professional services alone. I raise this not as a claim, Your Honour, but as context for understanding the nature of Mrs. Collins's contribution to this estate, which the respondent's submissions have conspicuously minimised. Garrison half rose, saying, "Your Honour, counsel is characterising." Judge Solvay looked at Garrison. "Mr. Manuel, you'll have your opportunity for rebuttal. Until then, I'd very much appreciate you remaining seated." With sweat on his forehead, he sat. There was one final exhibit. Nola had saved it with the deliberateness of someone who understood pacing. "Your Honour, I'd like to address the question of the respondent's conduct during the marriage as it relates to credibility, a matter the court is entitled to consider. I submit Exhibit G, which contains photographic evidence and a verified investigator's timeline confirming that the respondent maintained an intimate relationship outside the marriage for a period of no less than 11 months, including instances in which the respondent's associate visited the marital home in Mrs. Collins's absence. I also submit the relevant portion of Exhibit B's recordings, separate from the previously played segment, in which the respondent can be heard discussing his intention to delay initiating divorce proceedings until certain financial conditions were met, in order to, and I quote, "make sure she doesn't walk away with everything." She closed her folder and looked at the judge. "Mrs. Collins didn't come to this court seeking everything, Your Honour. She came seeking what is fair. What we have demonstrated today is that the respondent didn't extend her that same consideration. I would respectfully submit that the court should." She sat down. I looked straight ahead. Judge Solvay took 30 minutes. When she returned to the bench, she settled her glasses back onto her nose, looked at her papers, and spoke with the measured clarity of someone who had made up her mind before she left the room. "In the matter of Collins versus Collins, having reviewed all submitted evidence, testimony, and exhibits, this court finds as follows." She turned first toward Garrison's table. "The court finds sufficient grounds to conclude that the transfer of $68,000 to Fergus Collins constituted an attempt to conceal marital assets ahead of settlement proceedings. The respondent is ordered to account for the full return of those funds to the marital estate within 30 days, where they will form part of the divisible assets." Blair's jaw tightened again. This time I wasn't the only one who saw it. With respect to the marital home, having considered the petitioner's documented professional contribution to the property's current valuation, this court awards the marital residence to the petitioner, Alison Collins, in full. I heard Blair exhale sharply beside his attorney. Garrison put a steadying hand on his arm. "With respect to the investment portfolio, the court awards the petitioner 60% of the joint holdings, reflecting the disparity in conduct and the respondent's demonstrated intent to disadvantage the petitioner in these proceedings. The remaining 40% shall be retained by the respondent. Additionally, given the court's findings regarding the concealment of assets, the respondent is ordered to bear the petitioner's full legal costs in this matter." She looked up from her papers briefly at both tables. "This court expects full compliance within the prescribed timeframes. Any deviation will be treated accordingly. We are adjourned." The gavel came down. Nola turned to me. She didn't smile exactly. It was more the expression of someone who had built a thing properly and was satisfied that it had held. She placed her hand briefly over mine on the table. "Well done for being brave enough to start this," Nola said softly. I looked across the room to where Blair sat, still and silent, while Garrison murmured quietly in his ear. He didn't look at me. I don't think he could. I picked up my bag, stood up, and walked out of that courtroom into the pale February light. The terracotta living room was warm when I got home. Biscuit met me at the door, as he always did, winding around my ankles with the absolute certainty of a creature who had never doubted he was loved. I sat down on the sofa, my sofa, in my home, with my garden visible through the windows I had restored, and I let myself cry. It was tears releasing 4 months of holding something very heavy, and finally being allowed to put it down. Then I called Wren. She came over with wine, and we sat in the terracotta room until midnight. I won't tell you the revenge was sweet in some cinematic, triumphant way. That's not quite how it felt. It felt more like exhaling after holding your breath for 4 months. Like setting down something very heavy and finding that your hands still worked even though they were sore. It felt like the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had been underestimated, methodically and completely, by someone who should have known better. Blair moved into an apartment across the city. Marlene Orano, from what Wren tells me, relocated to a different company's marketing division. Fergus had some very unpleasant conversations with his own attorney about the money. Some evenings I sit in that room with Biscuit on my lap and Fig at my feet, and the light comes through the windows I restored at the back of the house, and I think about that Tuesday in October, the wooden spoon, the butternut soup, the laugh that wasn't mine anymore. I think about how I stood at that stove and felt the floor move, and chose very quietly not to fall. That choice saved me. Everything else was just paperwork.